Welcome to the Pint Glass Football Podcast.
This is Pint Glass Football, drink beer, talk NFL and college football. I'm your host, Brad Fowler, and McKinsey Brewing is the official beer of Pint Glass Football. Follow them at McKinsey Brewing. Follow us at pintglassfootball.com. If you're new to the show, hit that subscribe button. What's up, PGF Nation? The NFL draft is almost here. But first, Jalen Hurts gets a big contract. One of the best defensive players in the NFL once traded. How is that going to affect the NFL draft? And we're going to mock draft the rest of the first round and tell you some of our favorite sleepers in this upcoming draft. Joining me to do so, my new co-host, Alex Higdon. Alex, what's going on?
Hey, what's going on, Brad? It was a big week in the NFL. We finally getting a lot of traction, getting some news, finally getting some moves on these quarterback contracts that we've been expecting this offseason, and a big one dropped this week, like you said.
Yeah, definitely some news that we're going to jump into here before we get into some more NFL draft stuff. I want to start, and obviously we're going to talk about that big contract with Jalen Hurts, but speaking of big money, so reports say Josh Harris is reaching an agreement to purchase the Washington Commanders from Dan Snyder. The deal is worth just over $6 billion and still needs to be finalized. Now, Harris also owns the Philadelphia 76ers and the New Jersey Devils. Washington was once a marquee NFL franchise, but this is a franchise that's really become a punchline and just a downright black eye for the NFL in recent years. From an NFL investigation into Washington's workplace culture, a congressional investigation, multiple state attorneys generals are looking into allegations of financial improprieties. And that's just off the field, Alex. On the field, in Dan Snyder's 24 seasons, only 5 teams have had worse records during that period. What do you make of this sale? What are your initial thoughts on this and the NFL and the Commanders moving in a new direction with new ownership?
Good for the Commander fans. Great for the NFL. As you said, this is a pillar franchise that has been on the downside for a very long time. I mean, they've popped here and there, but nothing of the consistency, nothing of the rivalry that they had during the 80s and 90s and just the 80s and 90s, just the 80s and 90s. Obviously, for our era, Joe Gibbs winning 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks back when they were going by a different name. And now that they are the Commanders and moving into a new chapter as the Commanders, having to sold the team by Dan Snyder, going into a new regime. Hopefully this is a turning point for them as an organization. Selfishly, I am upset that Magic Johnson is a part of this group because he was initially part of a management group that was seeking to purchase the Raiders. So I am very sad about that. However, but as an overall NFL fan, I am happy for Commander fans that they've probably finally been hoping and praying to get Dan Snyder out of the way, and now he's out of the way of that team so they can probably get back to some of the greatness that they've been used to.
They've been one of the poorest ran franchises for several years. They have that rich history that you spoke about, the 3 Super Bowl wins. This was once a really proud franchise, and I think even a lot of their own fans have kind of turned on this ownership. So I think this is going to be a big breath of fresh air for this organization. Hopefully get this thing moving in the right direction. And speaking of the NFC East, we're going to shift to the Philadelphia Eagles, the defending NFC champs. They have reached a deal with quarterback Jalen Hurts on a 5-year, $255 million extension, including over $179 million guaranteed. This was according to a source that told ESPN's Adam Schefter earlier this week. Now, this is a guy who showed massive growth as far as a passer in year 2 as a starter in the NFL. He went from 19th to 4th in QBR, which is a big jump, and he went from 26th all the way to 11th in completion percentage. Eagles general manager Howie Roseman, the gamble paid off. He was selected in the second round of the 2020 draft Most people at the time thought he was a 3rd round, maybe 4th round pick, myself included here, Alex. I thought that this guy was a NFL backup at best when he came into the league. Now that gamble pays off. We've seen the player that he's developed into. The Eagles, however, are going to have some tough choices coming up now that the roster has Hurts getting paid a lot more money and taking up a lot more of that salary cap.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally earned this contract. He deserves it. Obviously, this will be the first domino to fall of the quarterbacks that we were expecting to see signed this offseason. I think this is a fair and balanced contract across the board. If we just simply look at the entire quarterback market, this obviously puts him at the top. The last person to get paid was, I believe, Russell, if I'm not mistaken, but it does put him above Kyler Murray by about at least $35 million, which I think is where he should be, and just above Josh Allen, which is where he should be in terms of just what he's accomplished. And as we know, each year the market goes up, so he's there. It looks like he's averaging about maybe 44.2. Obviously, they'll always have room to fluctuate and move up and down with the cap. So his cap number this year is 6.15. So he's carrying a low cap number in terms of what's hitting the actual salary cap, and then as 13.56, then 21.77, then in 2026, 31.77. Obviously, they'll be able to maneuver around that if they need to. But I think this gives them a lot of flexibility over the next 4 to 5 years where they can move money up, move money back, and give them some flexibility to remain competitive for at least the next 3 years before they'll kind of have to stand, hold firm and have those, and hopefully they've been in a winning situation and accumulated more draft picks to have some sustainability over the last 2 years of this contract. But let's not also forget, and I'll close here, one of the things that is very important that's included in this is the no trade clause.
That is important because obviously it gives Jalen Hurts the power to waive any type of trade and to really dictate where he would go if the Eagles decided they wanted to move off of him in a couple of years. It sounds like they have some flexibility here, Alex, but it also does make things somewhat more difficult as far as signing free agents or keeping some of your marquee players and paying them. What does this do for the Eagles' title window?
I think they would have a 2-year title window because in 2 years you're going to have to pay Devontae Smith. And then also you're going to have Dallas Goedert come up for a new deal as well. And then the other part of it is, I think within these next 2 years, they're going to lose Jason Kelce. They're also going to lose Lane Johnson to retirement, along with Fletcher Cox and Brandon Graham, which is why I brought up the draft aspect that allows them. Hopefully, they're going to have to hit on some draft picks and hopefully develop some players within the next 2 years behind those other players, because as we can see in those next 2 years, Lane Johnson has been breaking down but pushing through every year. Jason Kelce, I believe, is 35, about to be 36, and we know about Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox. I believe they're only on 1-year deals. So they're going to lose their veteran leadership and, pieces, stalwarts on the offensive line, and obviously stalwarts and veterans on the defensive line and leaders in the locker room over those next 2 years. So I think these 2 years are going to be very critical for them to make another run. Getting to the NFC Championship game and getting to another Super Bowl in these next 2 years that remain competitive is going to be key for them, while they have a little bit of flexibility, because that window will close very quick as we watch other teams in the NFC get better as well.
All right, like I mentioned in the intro, one of the best defensive players in the entire NFL is requesting a trade, and it's interesting the timing of this, Alex, because we have the NFL draft just days away. This could play a big-time role in this draft, depending on if he gets moved for draft picks or if he gets traded before the draft or possibly even during the draft. I'm talking about Budda Baker, the safety for the Arizona Cardinals. According to ESPN, he's made a request to be traded, and he's informed the team that he either wanted to be traded or receive a new deal that would make him the NFL's highest paid safety. I think we know that's probably not going to happen, more than likely. So it seems like a trade is imminent here. He has 2 years remaining on his current deal. He's a 2-time All-Pro, 5-time Pro Bowler, and quite frankly, maybe one of the most underrated players in the NFL right now.
Absolutely. Undersized, but plays with a big heart. Think Bob Sanders, like on that back end, if you remember that Colts defense and what he meant to that Colts defense. This is a guy that's tough. He shows up every day lunch pail player with exceptional skill set, tackle, intercept, cover, whatever you need him to do, blitz, he is willing to do it. And I do feel sorry that he's unfortunately been on the Cardinals this long during this period of just disarray and utter disorganization. So I can understand him wanting to get out. And to be fair, it's technically let's just say we're already in the 2023 season. So he's really only has 1 year deal. He only has 1 year left, including this year. And so, of course, he's looking for a new deal. This is very common. This is part of the business. Anybody that's going into with 1 year left on their contract, there's a little bit of uncertainty. You want to put yourself in the best chance to be a part of the market. And I'm pretty sure his agents advise, hey, we should seek a deal, try and seek some sort of a deal now to maximize our potential in the open market and kind of take advantage to get a new deal. So this is not uncommon. This is very common of any player, whether you're a quarterback, safety, kicker, whatever. So, but I really like this player. I think he's a leader. I think he can do wonders I'll say this to be more specific. He can be a final piece to a championship team. I will say that he can be a difference maker. Think Eric Weddle when he got to the Rams, what he meant for those final 6 games for the Rams by coming in and being a leader in that backfield and understanding as a vet. This is a guy that can be a playmaker and do some things similar to what Tyrann Mathieu did when he went to Kansas City. So I put him in that ilk because I like what I've always seen. His tape is wonderful. Good for him. I'm sorry. Good for him because I really don't know what Arizona's doing.
Yeah, I agree completely, Alex. And this is a guy going back to when he was a 5-star recruit coming out of Washington State. Obviously, I live out here in the Pacific Northwest. I was very familiar with this guy coming out because all the major colleges wanted him. He was looking at the 2 premier Northwest schools. His decision came down to Oregon and Washington. He decided to stay in his home state and play for the Huskies, went on to have a great college career, and then has obviously blossomed into one of the best NFL players in the league. Where are some landing spots for Baker as we approach the draft? Where would be a good landing spot for him?
Miami. Miami lost Byron Jones from that defensive backfield. You take a player like that, you plug him into that Miami backfield schemed by Vic Fangio, and I think you're going to watch him do some incredible things in Miami with the new coaching staff, and hopefully if Tua stays healthy. This is something that I think would be a final piece to maybe, again, Tua staying healthy and what we saw from last year. And if they're able to build off what we saw last year, a full training camp with Bradley Chubb, Vic Fangio calling the plays, and we know he's one of the best defensive minds of this generation. Plug in a plug-and-play player like Budda Baker, and I think you can see Miami make a huge leap this year and possibly make a final push for the chip. I'll just add one more team because they lost Von Bell. As I was just looking at my sheet, as Cincinnati lost Von Bell and Jesse Bates and Eli Apple, he's another player. We know that they're a fringe team on the bubble as well to win the chip. You need a player like this, losing both safeties, one of the better safeties in the league in Jesse Bates, and then also losing Eli Apple. This is a guy you can also plug and play in the backfield for Cincinnati as well that would fit and slide right in and help with a lot of the gaps that they currently have.
Alex, I hadn't thought about Miami, but after you said that would be a really interesting landing spot. They just signed Jalen Ramsey, one of the premier cornerbacks in this league. You add a safety like Budda Baker, and suddenly that secondary could become really formidable. A couple teams that I had written down were the Pittsburgh Steelers. Wow. They lost starting strong safety Terrell Edmonds. This move would allow Patrick Peterson to stay at cornerback instead of switching him to free safety, which I think the Steelers are planning on doing here in this upcoming season. So I think that's a team with a hole that he could make a big-time impact. And could you imagine him and Minkah Fitzpatrick playing side by side in that secondary? Man, they might just have the top safety duo in the entire league at that point.
Absolutely.
Another team that I think is interesting to maybe even keep an eye on here is the Houston Texans. This is a team that has a lot of cap space, and they have the draft capital to make a trade like this happen with new defensive-minded coach DeMeco Ryans taking over. I think he would love to add a little more star power and some leadership to this young locker room.
The Houston perspective I actually see, because I believe they had Jalen Petrie last year at safety, and you pair him, you put a veteran back there with the two rookies, Stingley and Petrie. Now you have a floor general back there as well to control what's going on in the backfield, which ultimately will help what's happening on the front seven. That's not a bad idea to make a leap and to set up your team moving forward with a defensive-minded coach. I actually like that as well.
If you guys checked out the first episode of season 5, we did a mock draft of the first 10 picks. Alex and I each picked players that we thought would go in the first 10 picks. We're going to switch it up slightly. We're going to do it together here, and we're going to finish the rest of round 1 going back and forth, making picks for each one of these NFL teams. Alex, you're on the clock with the 11th overall pick.
So 11th overall, we have Tennessee, and I went back and forth here because I think Tennessee they're in flux right now. There's a lot going on. I don't believe they know what direction they're going to go in. Personally, I think we're going to see a massive change in the next year. I think we're going to see them lose their head coach. I think they're going to lose Derrick Henry. So here, I think they go offensive line. I will go Paris Johnson here because I think they're going to need to build from the interior out. I know they just lost their other tackle. So you start him, you bring him in. He's an immediate day one starter, hopefully a 10-year starter, hopefully one of the safer, more well-rounded picks that they can move forward with. As I said, I think they're in flux right now. They're going to make a lot of changes. And if we're just talking about them staying here and not trading back, they take Paris Johnson as a building block to what their new future will be.
Yeah, Alex, I really like that pick. It makes total sense. It's a safe pick. I did pick Paris Johnson for the Bears, I believe, at pick number 9, but obviously this is a little different here. We're switching the format up. You had selected Peter Skronsky, the tackle from Northwestern there, to the Bears. So technically he was still on the board for you, so we're going to let it fly. Right. At number 12, the Houston Texans. I think they take Jackson Smith-Njigba, the wide receiver from Ohio State. If C.J. Stroud goes number 2, and it's starting to look more and more like that likely could be the pick, then this pick makes so much sense. The Texans need a number 1 wide receiver. They would have that built-in chemistry as former teammates at Ohio State. This guy is the smoothest route runner in this class. He's coming off of a lost season because of the hamstring injury, but he's showed in recent workouts and at the combine that he is healthy and ready to go and looking like that elite receiver again. I think that'd be the perfect pick for Houston at 12.
Yeah, I agree. I actually had that same pick as well when I was looking at my mock. We've, if you all have noticed, we've always been in same mind looking at players. So looking at number 13, we have the New York Jets, Miles Murphy. I think they just strengthened that defensive line. I know they went Jermaine Johnson last year. I think they continued with that trend and select Miles Murphy. Fortify that line. They look great in the defensive backfield with DJ Reed and Sauce Gardner. But I think you go ahead and you can't take a linebacker this high. I know they probably would like to, but you put Miles Murphy in and you slide him in as another edge rusher. You can put him in the rotation. You have a fresh round of defensive linemen coming in, similar to what we saw with the Philadelphia Eagles, and with that defense already being at the level that it is now, you are now applying more pressure to help out Aaron Rodgers to complete and get to the goal that you're trying to get to this year, which is the championship.
I think it's a great pick, and I think it's a great fit. At number 14, the New England Patriots. I think they go offensive line here. And I think the player that seems to be rising up draft boards is Darnell Wright, the offensive tackle out of Tennessee. He seems to be getting more and more buzz as we get closer to the draft. They need help at the tackle position. Now, they need wide receiver help. And this is definitely a spot here where I could see maybe they go wide receiver, but I think there's better value going after a tackle at this pick and maybe waiting into the second or third round and getting one of these wide receivers, because the top end talent at wide receiver isn't as explosive as we've seen in some recent drafts. And I think you're not going to find a guy like Darnell Wright in the second round, where I think you're going to be able to find more comparable wide receivers in the second round to the ones that you would find here at 14.
15, Green Bay. I'm going to go tight end. So I'm going to say the position first, but then I went back and forth on what was the better fit at tight end, and I'm going to go Michael Mayer. I went back and forth with him and Dalton Kincaid, which is, I knew the position that I wanted, but I'm going to go Michael Mayer here. A tight end, as we know, and even though he's not a rookie, he is a rookie. This is his first time full-time starting, and they lost their tight end. You slide in Michael Mayer right here. He's a fit, hard-nosed, great player, leader, can slide right in, be a day one starter for this team, and be a safety blanket for Jordan Love at tight end while he's still trying to figure things out while they start those two running backs and really ease him into the offense. You have Aaron Jones, you have Christian Watson, you have Romeo Doubs, and now you slide in another piece that will be a day one starter in Michael Mayer as well. That will be a safety blanket for Jordan Love while he's figuring out this offense.
Man, I was thinking the exact same thing. I was thinking tight end all the way. I was just waiting to hear which tight end it would be, because I think Dalton Kincaid is the better receiving option, more of a flex tight end. Michael Mayer is the more complete player, the better blocking inline tight end, a little more of a traditional tight end. But you touched on it. Green Bay is a team that's going to want to have balance, going to want to be able to run the ball. You're just getting a really good all-around player. At number 16, the Washington Commanders think they target corner. Top two guys off the board. I think they take Joey Porter Jr. out of Penn State, a guy we talked about on recent episodes. Alex and I both really high on this guy. Definitely some other positions that Washington could go here. It wouldn't completely surprise me if they looked at a tight end as well, or possibly offensive line. But I think getting a premium player at a premium position in a spot that they need to solidify makes a lot of sense.
Pittsburgh, and I think there's really only one place Pittsburgh can go here, and it's offensive line. And it's going to be offensive tackle. And you took Darnell Wright, so I'm going to go with Broderick Jones here. Georgia, obviously championship pedigree. You need an immediate starter. They started to work on that offensive line this offseason. I think this is just another piece because they have got to give Kenny Pickett. They have to find out quickly if Kenny Pickett is a guy. As we also saw, just to mention today, that they also picked up Allen Robinson. So now you have Allen Robinson, George Pickens, Deontay Johnson. You got to give this kid some time to along with Pat Freiermuth. You slide in Broderick Jones. Now you have your bookend tackles with the other person that they signed. And I think you can get to see what they can be and also allow Najee Harris to regain his rookie form and actually be a better running back than he was his rookie season, as well as an outside flex to catch the ball as well.
Yeah, I was thinking offensive line as well, especially a tackle position. That pick is an absolute home run for the Steelers there at 17. At 18, the Detroit Lions, Bijan Robinson, the running back out of Texas. Taking a defender here probably makes more sense. And I get that. There's probably people listening to this going, wait a second, Detroit's defense has a lot of holes. Why are you taking a running back? But I think easily getting the best running back this late in the draft, and a guy that is realistically a top 5 talent in this entire class, is just too much value to pass up at 18 here for Detroit.
Tampa Bay. I don't know. I honestly do not know what I would do if I was sitting in the draft room of Tampa Bay. This is something that I would probably just go best player available. But I think I'm going to go here, and I'm going to go with interior defensive line Kalaji Kancey out of Pittsburgh. I believe he has a similar size. They've been likening him to Aaron Donald with the size and the power, so on and so forth, to fortify inside with Vita Vea. And they're also looking at losing Devin White, so they're going to need some help. And there's not a linebacker that you can take here that you would take this high to replace Devin White if they do move him. However, this is a guy that if you put him in the middle, you have fortified your run defense, and losing Devin White, this will help out a lot as well.
I've got to ask you, Alex, because we haven't talked about him much yet. So I want to just take a second here and get your thoughts. I like the tape. I don't know if he translates at the NFL level like a lot of people think. And I know you're projecting what these teams might do. And that's what we're doing here. We're trying to pick players that we think would go in these spots. It's not necessarily who you would pick. But what do you make of him at the next level? Do you think he's a guy that's going to be a hit, or is he a guy that we're going to look back on and be like, he probably shouldn't have gone in the first round?
Okay, so let's think about him, think about Pittsburgh, think about the pedigree, because I do believe where this person comes from, where they played at, who coached them matters. And I like what's happening at Pittsburgh. You know how I feel about Western Pennsylvania and those type of players. So I love those type of players, and I love those type of players that come from that program. If he can continue the work ethic that's been installed with him at Pittsburgh and continue at this level, standing next to someone the size of Vita, who's going to swallow up double teams, this is going to give him an opportunity as an individual player on one-on-one with his speed and strength, not necessarily the size. He will be more of an undersized interior defensive lineman you can perhaps maybe bounce outside on jumbo plays, but for the most part is going to play on the interior, take advantage of the speed and quickness and do some damage in one-on-ones against some of the slower guards. I think you can see him do some things specifically on that team, specifically next to Vita.
Okay, and that makes sense. I like the fit, and I like the player, and like I said, I like the tape. The size and the arm length are a little bit of a red flag for me. I wonder if it translates to the next level, but he's an interesting prospect. And like I said, when you watch his tape, there's definitely a lot to like there. At number 20, the Seattle Seahawks, a couple different directions they could go here. I think they go wide receiver, though. And this might surprise some people, but I think they go Zay Flowers, wide receiver out of Boston College. I think Zay Flowers really fits as their third wide receiver behind DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. This is a guy with 4.42 40-yard dash speed. This is a guy who can stretch the field. He's elusive, tough, plays bigger than his size. He has a physical element to his game. Really, really good player. I'm pretty high on Zay Flowers. I'm curious what your thoughts are and his fit in Seattle.
I like it. Tyler Lockett 2.0. So who better to go to than be with Tyler Lockett, and you play with Tyler Lockett, and we're dubbing you as Tyler Lockett 2.0. Great hands, speed. Put him out there. You can slide him in the slot. He can play outside. You can interchange him with Tyler Lockett while DK is your ex, and do some things and expand more on what you already had, what you built on with Geno, and come back with a full camp with Kenneth Walker as the full-time starter walking in on day one. That is a very formidable offense and a very dangerous offense if you can build off what Geno started last year and add another weapon to expound upon that. So I believe it is on me now with the Los Angeles Chargers. The reason you heard me say wow in the moment is because I had Zay Flowers pegged here. But since we're not doing any trades, we're going to stand still and we're going to go with Jordan Addison, another complete receiver. He had an elite college quarterback, and I'll say that again, elite college quarterback throwing to him, and now you take him and you slide him in with the Los Angeles Chargers with another budding star quarterback in Justin Herbert that will throw him the ball, and he can stay there and learn behind Mike Williams as well as Keenan Allen. And we know that either one of those gentlemen will not be there next year. More than likely Keenan Allen, but you get a year behind a vet who's consistent, who has work ethic, who has an incredible work ethic that worked himself up to being one of the better receivers in the league and long lasting in the league. And you get to stay behind him for a year in the slot and learn those plays and get to watch him work and get to learn from him, so that following year you can now step up into his role, or rather the Y role, and continue what the Los Angeles Chargers have started when having those great receivers, and then continue on to consistently help Justin Herbert. Obviously, we knew Bijan Robinson would have been the pick here, but you picked him earlier, so they have to go Jordan Addison here.
When I was looking at the Chargers, I was really thinking two positions, tight end or wide receiver. I was thinking maybe this is a spot where Dalton Kincaid goes off the board, but Jordan Addison, I also love this pick because Keenan Allen, really good player, been a good player in this league for a long time. Not quite the player we saw a couple years ago, though. I think it's safe to say that he's past his prime at this point, and Michael Williams is a guy who just has really struggled to stay healthy. I think it would benefit them to get a guy like this. out of USC, great route runner, knows how to get open, Biletnikoff Award winner. He excelled in 2 different systems, transferring from Pitt to USC, and played at a high level in both. This is a great pick, Alex. Hey, PGF Nation, are you tired of the same old bland food at your tailgate parties? Well, let me tell you about my friends at the Tailgate Foodie, the seasoning and barbecue sauce company that specializes in elevating your tailgate and backyard cooking game. With their unique blend of spices and sauces, the Tailgate Foodie will take your taste buds on a flavor journey that you won't forget. Use code PintGlassFoodie for 15% off your first order at thetailgatefoodie.com. And that leads me to the 22nd pick, the Baltimore Ravens. I'm going to stick with the wide receiver theme here. Quentin Johnston out of TCU. I think this is a spot where Baltimore looks to add some more depth to the wide receiver room. Big catch radius, one of the few big play, big body receivers in this draft. This draft is littered with a lot of slot style receivers, if you will, a lot of smaller, quicker guys. Quentin Johnston is not that. This is a big time player with big size, big reach. Now he can make plays down the field with big chunk catches, and he can create after the catch. Now I know they signed Odell Beckham Jr., but it's just a 1-year deal. So they still have issues at wide receiver beyond 2023.
At 23, I'm going to go with a cornerback here in Deonte Banks. I was looking at Emmanuel Forbes, but I decided to go with Deonte Banks here. When you look at that Minnesota defense last year and the amount of yards they continuously gave up because of that backfield, Harrison Smith is getting older. They had Pat Pete last year. None of the previous cornerbacks that they drafted actually stood out. So now, and they did go out this year and they did get Marcus Davenport to try and fortify that front seven. But I think you slide in Deonte Banks here to give that defensive backfield a boost, and you get a cover corner that can do some things. You pair him, I guess Andre Booth was decent last year. I'll probably have to look at some more tape to see if I'm sold on him, but you need another cornerback. They also signed Brian Murphy as the nickel back, so they should be fine there. But I think you bring in another cornerback here in Deonte Banks to help solidify that backfield. And hopefully that defensive front can cause some havoc to give that defensive backfield some breaks, and Deonte Banks can shine.
Man, I love that pick, and it makes so much sense. That Vikings secondary was terrible last year. They've got to do something to shore up that secondary. 4.35 seconds on the 40-yard dash, 42-inch vertical. This guy is explosive. He can move. He has legit big-time speed. I really like Deonte Banks, and in a lot of other NFL drafts, he'd be a top 2, top 3 cornerback. This just so happens to be an exceptionally deep position this year. What a value getting a guy like that at 23. At pick 24, the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think this is where the slide ends for Dalton Kincaid. Just too good of a player here left on the board. Kincaid is easily the best pass-catching tight end in this class. He's a prototypical flex tight end. He had 16 touchdowns over the past 2 years at Utah. He can work the seams down the middle of the field. Perfect fit to put him into this offense and give a guy like Trevor Lawrence another big playmaker in the middle of the field.
Yeah, I like that pick. And while they only have Evan Ingram, I believe they only have him on a 1-year deal again. Now you can go double tight end. You have Calvin Ridley and Zay Jones, or rather Christian Kirk on the outside, and with Travis Etienne in the backfield and Doug Peterson as the offensive coordinator. I think we are going to be able to see a lot of fun things, especially when you can flex Kincaid off of the line and make him a third wide receiver and really allow Doug Peterson to scheme a lot of things up and cause a lot of havoc, as he did last year. I would specifically point out those last 9 games where Trevor Lawrence came into his own and they made that final push. So I love that pick. And again, with Evan Ingram on the last year of his deal, he can slide right in, slide right in, and then take over going forward. And I think that gives them a nice, beautiful set of receiver, tight end, running back to move forward with Trevor Lawrence. At number 25, the New York Giants. Now, the Giants need a lot on offense, one of the things as I was going through, and once you called out Quentin Johnson, because I did not think a lot of wide receivers would go in the first round, but it seems that they are going. And Quentin Johnson was somebody I thought would be able to slide to them. But since he didn't, I had to look at the safety for the New York Giants. And here is where I think you get Brian Branch to come off the board for Alabama. Again, I wanted to go at a skill position. There's obviously perhaps a running back position that could be open. We do not know yet. But I think you bring in Brian Branch here because they are undersized at safety at the moment. I believe Bobby McCain, who I think is 5'10", more of an undersized, who came in as a cornerback. And they have now moved him they flexed him to safety as of right now. But you bring in Brian Branch, obviously stalwart from Alabama, power football player, and can eventually become your signal caller if he should need the green dot. He can call the offense out as well and is a tackling machine.
At pick 26, the Dallas Cowboys defensive interior is the biggest question mark for the Dallas Cowboys defense. That's why they're going to take Brian Breesy, defensive tackle out of Clemson. When you look at this defense, there's not a lot of holes. They've got playmakers at a lot of different levels, but like I said, the big question mark is up front. This is not a great class for defensive tackles, so they really probably can't afford to not get one of the top guys here at 26, because by the time they get into the second, third round, you're just not going to find day one type of starters. That's why I think they pull the trigger here on Brian Breesy.
Cowboys going after defensive tackle. I like it. I think they've done some wonderful things in the defensive backfield, finding Donovan Wilson. I think led them in interceptions with 5 last year. He was a steal for them. And I agree. You're set at linebacker, right? You're set at linebacker right now. Obviously, we know what you're doing on the outside defensive line on your pass rushers. Now you do some damage on the inside that will continuously help Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence on the outside and get you a push up the middle to help the run defense. I like that pick. I like that pick a lot. Buffalo Bills. Now, every single thing that I wanted for the Buffalo Bills is gone. Wide receiver is gone. Running back is gone, but we figured that Bijan wouldn't be here anyway. So here I have the Buffalo Bills, and I went back and forth in terms of looking at guard or offensive tackle, and I'm going to go offensive tackle here, and it's Antoine Harris from Oklahoma. You need to get that offensive line straight. You have a franchise quarterback that's running too much. You finally got some semblance of a larger running back and a quintessential running back in the backfield with Damian Harris. So you're going to need to have some blocking for him. Antoine Harris is the pick here that I have for Oklahoma. Not the guy that I would have wanted here or the position that I would have wanted here, but because this is now a position of need and you lost the right side of your offensive line, Antoine Harris is the pick I have here for Buffalo.
At number 28, this was a spot for the Cincinnati Bengals where I was really hoping that Michael Mayer would still be available at tight end. You took him a little earlier than I was expecting. I've got to shift gears here. I'm going to take the other big pressing need for the Bengals, and that's at cornerback. And I think the Bengals are going to take Cam Smith, cornerback out of South Carolina, a guy that seems to be climbing draft boards. What a deep class. I know I keep saying this, but man, what a deep class at corner, and getting terrific value here this late in the first round. Quick feet. He's got really good stop and start acceleration, closing speed, ball skills, really instinctive player on the back end. I really like the tape on Cam Smith, and I think he's a day one starter for Cincinnati.
Yeah, agreed. We talked about it earlier, losing both safeties as well as Eli Apple. They need to definitely, I think they're kind of pigeonholed into that spot that they're going to have to, as it stands right now from a draft standpoint, they're going to have to go draft something in that defensive backfield because they are barren there right now. So I totally agree. Looking at the Saints at 29, here is a place that I would have loved to have a tight end for Derek Carr to go to. I'm going to surprise you here. I actually had something else written down, but I think that I am going to go with Zach Charbonnet. That's a surprise. I know it's a surprise, but we don't know what's going on with Alvin Kamara. They did sign Jamal Williams, but I don't think Jamal Williams is what he was in Detroit. I don't think he's that here. I believe they go Zach Charbonnet because I don't know. Again, we don't know what's going on with Alvin Kamara, and I don't think he's long for the team after this year. So I'm going to go Zach Charbonnet, team him up, have him there with Jamal Williams. As again, from my standpoint, I don't think Jamal Williams will be great player, hardworking, but I don't think he's going to be the player in New Orleans as he was in Detroit. But I'm throwing a wrinkle in here on purpose, and I like throwing in wrinkles. I like being the outside the box thinker here. I go with Zach Charbonnet.
Yeah, I didn't see that one coming for sure. This is a class where running back kind of drops off quickly after the top guy, but we've talked about it here, Alex. It's a deep group as far as having a lot of guys that could be playmakers at the next level. Zach Charbonnet is a guy that we're both really high on, and probably higher on him than most media and draft analysts, but I like that pick and bringing that balance, bringing that running game, and helping solidify that position for your new quarterback in Derek Carr. That brings me to pick 30, the Philadelphia Eagles, the defending NFC champs. I think the pick that makes the most sense here is O'Cyrus Torrence, guard out of Florida. I think he's the best interior offensive lineman in this class. I know he's my number one guard and a guy that you can move around from right guard, left guard, dominated in the run game at Florida, and was an anchor in pass protection. You've got your young franchise quarterback under that new contract like we talked about. You mentioned some of the pieces up front are getting a little older. It's time to solidify that offensive line for the future. I think this is a great spot. Late in the draft, you're still getting arguably the top player at his position on the board in O'Cyrus Torrence.
I think that's a great pick. Solid player. We'll need some coaching. There's a lot of these players that come in there, has a motor, but it needs a little, you need to start it up a little while before it can start on all cylinders. But I think if you give him great coaching, put him around a great coaching staff and some other veterans, he'll be fine. Last pick in the draft, because Miami had forfeited their pick due to their previous scandal. We only have 31 picks. This is the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I looked at a few different places that they could go. I kept thinking wide receiver, losing Juju Smith, even though they have Sky Moore that they can probably slide in as well as losing Mecole Hardman. But I don't think there's a wide receiver here that they want. I also thought about linebacker. I'm going to go Will McDonald. Now, here's the thing about Will McDonald. Undersized, he primarily played defensive end at Iowa State. However, I believe he can play it on this line. Derek Nandi, Chris Jones, and again, I'm going to mention they lost Carlos Dunlap and they lost Frank Clark. Chris Jones, Nandi, and Karlaftis are going to garner double teams. Chris Jones, we know for a fact, is going to garner double teams. You take this kid, even though he's a little light at about 240 pounds, but does have good size at 6'4". You stand him next to Chris Jones, who is going to gobble up another guy, as I said earlier about Vita Vea, another guy that's going to gobble up double teams and leave him on one-on-one, and that allows him to use his athleticism and speed to get around the edge and hopefully cause some havoc for the defending champions and give them obviously another ability to possibly appear again in another Super Bowl. I don't know. He's been the bet. He's the sure bet in Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. Why not? They have never played a role playoff game since he's come into the league. Why not keep it going? Why not and move forward with another pass rusher in Will McDonald?
I love that pick, Alex. I'm really high on Will McDonald. I really, really like this kid's game. 10 forced fumbles in his career at Iowa State. Just to put that in perspective, Will Anderson, who many people have is arguably the best defensive player in this class, has 1 at Alabama. This kid knows how to get after the quarterback. He knows how to take the ball away. I love his motor, his drive, and his instincts. I'm with you on the size, a little bit light in the frame, but I think with an NFL weight regimen and weight training and bulking up a little bit at the next level, I think he can get up to the weight that maybe is a little more ideal and could be a really good pick late in the first. I think this is a guy who could be a steal, quite frankly, in this draft. I think a lot of people are kind of sleeping on Will McDonald a little bit. I love that pick. Speaking of sleepers, we've talked about all these first-round picks. We've focused a lot on the top prospects, ranking some of the deep position groups in earlier episodes, talking about all these top players. I want to jump into some sleepers here, Alex. Let's give the listeners a couple guys that we like that are maybe some more middle round, even later round guys that you've kind of circled here in the NFL draft process that you're thinking, hey, keep an eye on this guy, somebody that maybe goes third, fourth, second, fourth round, fifth round, wherever it is that you think could be a difference maker at the next level.
I'll start with running back. As we all know, running backs are rarely taken in the first round, even though I did take one in this draft. We took two in this draft. And with one of those guys being gone, based upon what we drafted, I like Tank Bigsby. I like Tank Bigsby out of Auburn. I like his size. He did run a little bit slow. I think he ran about maybe a 4.56 or 4.56, 4.58, 40, but big. Over 200 pounds, downhill runner. He can actually do a couple of cuts. He can do some moves. He can make a jump cut in the middle in the hole and get lateral quickly. I would say maybe anywhere between the third and the fifth round, he can be pushed up. I think he can be probably more of the fourth or fifth round to be honest. He can be pushed up based upon our draft selections. He may get pushed up around because there won't be as many left in the back end of the draft, but I like Tank Bigsby out of Auburn.
Yeah, Tank Bigsby. This is a guy who's starting to get a little buzz here in the pre-draft process. People are starting to talk about him a little more, going back, watching the tape. He's a pretty good player. I like that pick a lot. I'm going to start off with cornerback Riley Moss out of Iowa. 39-inch vertical, ran a 4.45 40-yard dash at the combine. This is a guy who's an instinctive cornerback. He's got good size, good play strength, hits hard. We talked about Devin Witherspoon and how he plays more like a safety when it comes to tackling and hitting guys over the middle. Similar style here for Riley Moss. Really physical cornerback. 11 interceptions since 2018. Took 3 back for pick sixes. Just a dynamic cornerback that I think in a very deep cornerback class is getting slept on just a little bit.
For my next pick, I love this kid. I am in the state of North Carolina. Appalachian State, Nick Hampton. I love this kid. Not because I'm in the same state and I got to see a lot of him, but I really, really like what I've seen out of Nick Hampton. I mean, if you look at his last 3 years, high production in terms of being a disruptor, projected to be a 3-4 outside linebacker, edge rusher in the NFL. I love his size. I love what he did, specifically in terms of he's a 6'3", 225. Can probably use a little bit more weight to help in that run. But we have these flex safety / linebackers now. But what he did and what I saw against Texas A&M and that upset. He had a fumble recovery. I believe he also had a sack. He had a tackle for loss, but he was causing havoc even when he wasn't getting to the quarterback. And that's what I love to see is, are you causing pressures? Are you causing havoc? And are you flushing them out, cutting off the field because you're rushing so hard from one side, you force them to one side, cutting off the field. And all of those things help your defensive backfield, help your defense when you're doing the little things that do not show up on the stat sheet. I like Nick Hampton as between a 4th and 6th round pick.
Yeah, I like Nick Hampton too, a guy that can get in the backfield, a disruptor, a guy who makes plays behind the line of scrimmage. Those are my kind of players on the defensive side of the ball. I'm going to switch to the offensive side, and I'm going to stick with Iowa here. I've got another Iowa prospect that I think is getting slept on a little bit. Sam Laporta, the tight end for the Iowa Hawkeyes, 6'3", 245 pounds, big hands, ran a 4.59 40-yard dash. A guy that's tough to tackle. I mean, he knows how to get open, especially versus zone coverage. He's a crafty route runner, just a good all-around player in another group that's pretty deep at tight end.
Yeah, the tight end, I think tight end you can get to maybe even the third and the fourth round, and you can find you can find a starter anywhere, but let's just say what we're projecting. I think you can maybe go as deep as the fourth round and find a day one productive starter, not a superstar, but you can find a productive starter that can perhaps develop into one of the more upper echelon tight ends that we've seen in the league. My theme is defense, obviously. I like Brandon Hill out of Pittsburgh. Again, you know how I feel about these Western Pennsylvania players, but I like Brandon Hill, safety out of Pittsburgh, 5'11", 195 pounds. He can actually play man to man. That's one of the things I like in this league, because what are we dealing with now coming to the league? We're dealing with the Michael Mays, the Dalton Kincaids. You need a safety that can pick up that linebacker and cover. And that's one of the key things that I like about him. Not the strongest tackler, but however, with everybody going to 3 wide receiver sets with 1 tight end on the field, and a lot of time that's a flex tight end, you can have a safety on the field that can cover and help out when teams are now sitting mostly 60 to 70% 3 wide receiver sets, and you have a safety out there that can also cover as well.
You're highlighting a lot of defensive guys. I've got a little more offense on my sleeper list. I'm going to the running back position. Tyjae Spears out of Tulane. Smaller school guy, a guy that on Saturdays a lot of people might not see, didn't play in the SEC or Big Ten or one of these big conferences, so might have gotten a little overlooked here, but at 5'10", 200 pounds, I think he's the second, maybe third round guy. He's tough, elusive. He's got quick acceleration, big play capability, a guy that can be a home run hitter in the open field. He averaged 7 yards per carry during his career at Tulane. You want to talk about a productive player? He's got smooth change of direction. I just really like this guy's game.
I know I've been going defense a lot, but here's a player, Aiden O'Connell out of Purdue. I like this kid, and I likened him to the Brock Purdy of this draft. That doesn't mean he's going to be Brock Purdy. I'm just talking about the potential guy, because everybody now is going to be looking for Brock Purdy, which is funny with the trends in the NFL, because they act like coaching doesn't matter. But that's a whole other story. But I like Aiden O'Connell in here. Played in big games, stood in the pocket. Again, I always look for, I don't care if the pass is completed or not. I look to see if you made the right read and made the pass. All of those things, those are the things that are hard to coaches making, is decision making at the quarterback position. I like what I saw from Aiden O'Connell. Does not have the big arm, but has I like to say like the safe arm. He can make the throws that are necessary. Obviously, if you're looking for somebody to throw 90-yard bombs, this is not your guy. But if you're coming in and you're talking about, that's why I liken him to Brock Purdy, that can be a game manager, make the right plays, can be coached. I like Aiden O'Connell as a sleeper pick. This is a guy that'll probably go more around between 5th and maybe even undrafted, but between the 5th and 7th round.
We're getting really close to the draft. It feels like you might have been ahead of the curve with him, because there's a little bit of buzz and momentum starting to build for Aiden O'Connell. And I get why. I totally get why. I think he is going to be a day 3 pick. I'd be shocked if he goes the undrafted free agent route. And you hit on it. I think it's because the accuracy, the intelligence, he has a lot of those intangibles. You touched on it. He's not going to wow you at the combine. He's not a workout warrior. He doesn't have all the traits that we talk about with some of these other guys, but just a savvy, smart quarterback who makes good decisions. There's always a place for guys like that in the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely.
My last sleeper here, Alex, a guy that I think is starting to get a little bit of buzz as well. Ole Miss wide receiver Jonathan Mingo, 6'2", 220 pounds, big hands, ran a 4.46 40-yard dash, 39.5-inch vertical. I mean, you talk about a big physical player, a guy who's got all the traits you're looking for at the wide receiver position. We talked about the wide receiver class a little bit earlier. I mentioned how this is kind of a smaller class. There's not a lot of big physical receivers in this class. Jonathan Mingo kind of stands out in this group. Something about his game that I love, that I know you love, and you talk about it at players at all positions, he gives that big-time effort. Hard-working kid, tracks and catches the football downfield at a high level. He gets to that top end speed quickly. I think he's a guy, he's got to clean up the route running a little bit. He needs a little more polish in his game, but there's a lot to like with wide receiver Jonathan Mingo.
Yeah, and wide receiver has been thin from my perspective, and I don't know how you feel about it, but wide receiver haven't been deep in the previous drafts in terms of projection. I think this is one of the more skittish drafts for wide receiver. Like, you're going to have to get that guy in the first three, a guy that you think is going to be a guy. Of course, anybody can pop at any point in time, but a guy that you think is going to be a guy, I think you're going to have to get that person in the first 3 rounds, because it starts to fall off a lot when you get past, I would say, top of the third. It'll start to fall off a lot. I don't know. What are your thoughts on wide receiver? Do you feel the same way in terms of wide receiver?
I do. I think there's some good players, like we've touched on here. There's some good players in this draft at receiver, but we've had some exceptional wide receiver drafts in the last, absolutely, I would say 3 years. 3, maybe, I'm trying to think, maybe at least the last 3 drafts, maybe 4 if my memory serves me here, where we've had some really, really loaded wide receiver classes where you could find high-end talent in the first round, and you could find big-time starter-capable guys all the way into the 3rd, 4th round. I just don't see that kind of depth in this class like you touched on, and I also don't see the high-end guys at the top of this draft, and I think that's why, like that mock we just finished, I think that's why we're going to see some of the first receivers are probably going to go middle of the first, where in recent years we've seen a couple guys go off the board in the top 10. I'd be surprised if we saw that this year. Agreed.
For my last, I'm going back defense, and it's going to be Noah Sewell out of Oregon. Driven, 6'3", 250 pounds, ran I believe a 4.64 40. However, when I got to look at him and I got to look at where he played, you have to go to the 2021 tape when he played in the box. This guy will stop the run and not afraid to stick his head in there and tackle. May not be a full 3-down back, may be able to be coached up to be a 3-down back, but on those running downs, when you need a run stuffer at the linebacker position, this is that guy. When he was in 2021, when he was in the box, you were not getting past him. I mean, he was just a tackling machine. 114 total tackles, 8.5 for loss, and also had a sack and an interception and a couple of passes defended. So he defends more of a zone linebacker. You don't want to put him in full coverage because he will get beat. He's not fluid with his hips. But I do like him. Again, this is a guy that'll be on the back end. I would say day 3 pick. And maybe perhaps even an undrafted free agent. As we know, about 33% of this league is made up of undrafted free agents, so you never know. If you don't get drafted, you can always make it. But Noah Sewell is my final pick in terms of somebody to look out for.
Yeah, I like that one a lot, Alex. Being here in the Northwest, I'm pretty familiar with Noah Sewell out of Oregon, and you touched on it perfectly. This guy was really a really special college linebacker. His first couple years in college, Dan Lanning came over from Georgia, took over the program as the new head coach, switched up the defensive scheme, and he just never really found his footing in the new scheme. You go back to the old tape and you see the kind of player that he could be: a run stopper, a thumper, a playmaker, and a disruptor in the backfield. I think there's a lot to like about Noah Sewell. His brother, Penei Sewell, was a top 10 pick just a few years ago for the Detroit Lions on the offensive line. He's got those NFL bloodlines. I think this is a guy who could be a steal as well. The NFL draft is just around the corner. So excited to break it down. Another episode here. I want to give a special shout out the Tailgate Foodie for sponsoring this episode. Check them out at thetailgatefoodie.com. I'm Brad Fowler. He's Alex Higdon. This is Pint Glass Football. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on new episodes, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Pint Glass Football Podcast. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on Twitter at PGF Podcast.